Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the death toll from 5 days of clashes in South Africa rises to at least 72. The army sent in to help quell the unrest that was unleashed by the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma last week. Also, 8 months of clashes in northern Ethiopia continue to endanger the lives of civilians. Millions are on the brink of famine. The World Food Programme's managed to get about 50 trucks of aid through to Mekele, but says that it is not nearly enough. And a quartet of South Sudanese refugees who call Kenya home have been levelling up their training ahead of the Tokyo Olympics. The athletes will be competing for the second time under the banner of the Refugee Olympic Team. But first, widespread pillaging has erupted in Johannesburg and the province of KwaZulu-Natal in the fifth day of fatal unrest in South Africa. At least 72 people have been killed. Police have been overwhelmed by the crisis, and 2,500 soldiers have been sent in to help. Tensions first spilled over last Friday after former President Jacob Zuma began a 15-month jail sentence for contempt of court after he refused to cooperate with a corruption probe. Our MC Ferreira joins us now with more. MC, is there any sign of the situation calming down?
Well, compared to what we saw overnight and during the course of the day, it is relatively calmer. The businesses have again been torched in Durban, in KwaZulu-Natal. That's the province where the army was deployed, and also in Gauteng. But it does seem to have had some effect, along with companies, of course, calling in private security to protect their businesses. But there are fears here that it will flare again. We, of course, don't know when the court is going to rule on the former president's rescission application, and also that it can spread. And we've had the previous other provinces ask for the army to deploy there as well.
Now, is there any coordination or leadership to the unrest that we've seen?
Oh, absolutely. After Zuma was sentenced, people close to him said to me, "We will now take the country back to 1976. And that's, of course, a reference to the Soweto uprisings. And at the weekend, we saw his family, his children, cheer on the violence and the vandalism. And a few hours ago, his eponymous foundation issued a statement saying that peace and security in the country now depends on his immediate release. So clearly trying to hold the Constitutional Court and the government to ransom there. I mean, this is not really surprising because in February, long before he was sentenced, he said that if the court were to jail him, he threatened that there would be an uprising. And today the police minister said they've identified 12 people who are actively inciting this and that they will act against those figures.
How's this being reflected on the political scene?
Well, there are various elements to it, and I think loyalty to him is just a fraction of it. We had the police minister say this afternoon that that's one element, but for the rest, it's a matter of widespread desperation. That was the word he used. And I mean, one has to realize that we now have official unemployment of higher than 32%. It was exacerbated by COVID and by the draconian lockdown we had last year. So, and I think there's a widespread sense that, it's hard to fathom the frustration, and there's the sense that government is not acting to alleviate the plight of people. We're also, of course, a few months away from local government elections, so opposition parties are also playing this for political gain. And this afternoon, we had the Economic Freedom Front to say that calling in the army was, in fact, an act of war on the people.
Thanks very much. MC Ferreira there for us in Cape Town. Now, Ethiopian Tigrayan forces, the TPF, have advanced into land claimed by the neighbouring Amhara region, prompting calls for local militia there to arm themselves. Battling in the north between Tigrayans and federal troops began last November. The TPF retook the regional capital of Mekele about 2 weeks ago, and there now fears that the conflict is widening despite a unilateral government ceasefire. The crisis has left thousands dead, 2 million displaced, and 4 million at risk of famine. The World Food Programme says that it's finally managed to get 50 trucks of food and emergency supplies into Mekele, but more is needed. Thompson Piore from the World Food Programme joins me now with more. Thompson, thanks so much for speaking to us. Now, first of all, tell us a bit about how difficult it was for you to get those 50 trucks into Mekele.
Thanks so much for having me. It is incredibly challenging. For example, the first convoy that has reached Mekelle on Monday took 4 days to travel from a town called Semera, which is just over 400 kilometers away. This is a journey that should take us half the time, but there are multiple security checkpoints and routes that have delayed the arrival. Our teams counted over 10 security checkpoints, and they were telling me this afternoon that at each and every stop, humanitarian cargo was rigorously searched. Quite frankly, this should not be happening given the urgency of the emergency that we have in Tigray. We need to be getting life-saving assistance to vulnerable communities, and 50 trucks arriving after a 4-day journey is just a drop in the ocean. We need to be doing 100 trucks on any given day for half the time if we are to reverse the catastrophic humanitarian situation there.
And for the teams that have made it through, what are they telling you? What condition are the communities that they're finding they're in? In fact, give us a sense of the overall humanitarian situation as far as you know it to be.
Look, this is a conflict that is 8 months old. For those of us who have lived and worked in conflict zones, even 1 day of fighting is simply too long. The food security situation is simply dire. People should have harvested, they didn't. They should have planted, the majority haven't done so. People are weary, they are desperate for international help. Almost 4 million people need emergency food assistance right now. About 400,000 people are at risk of famine. Numbers don't lie. This situation is beyond bad. But what scares me the most, Joy, is that we are far from where we need to be in terms of our response. We need to transport over 10,000 metric tons of food and 150,000 liters of fuel every week. At the current rate, WFP cannot hope to scale up to reach over 2 million people who are desperately in need of assistance.
So are there any signs that access might be getting better? We heard last week Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed saying that humanitarian flights were going to be allowed back into Tigray. Have you seen that make any difference at all?
Look, where there is conflict and limited access, you have just the right recipe for disaster. The needs in Tigray are quite staggering, and WFP needs far quicker access in order to be able to mount an effective response. We are calling for faster road passages and air access to be guaranteed immediately so that we are able to get life-saving food into the region, as well as to scale up our own response to reach over 2 million people. The government of Ethiopia has indeed granted authorization for humanitarian flights into Tigray, but the World Food Programme is waiting on clearances and assurances from all the relevant authorities before we can proceed to launch those flights.
Well, thanks very much for giving us a sense of the situation there. Thompson Piri there from the World Food Programme. Now, Ghana's First Lady said that she will not accept a salary recently approved for the wives of the President and Vice President. Rebecca Akufo-Addo has also offered to repay all allowances that she's received since her husband took office in 2017. Now, that comes to around $152,000. The country's facing economic turbulence, and there was public outcry over the decision to put Akufo-Addo and Samira Bawumia on the public payroll for their supportive roles in government as wives of the Vice President and President. The monthly payments of around $3,500 were to be backdated for 4 years. Akufo-Addo has pointed out that she never asked to be paid. Now, when the Tokyo Olympics kick off next week, it'll be the second time that the Summer Olympics feature a team of refugee athletes. There'll be 29 this time, all competing under the Refugee Olympic Team banner. Amongst them will be 4 sportsmen and women who are from South Sudan but have been living in a Kenyan camp where they've been giving their training their all ahead of the big event. Nick Sherman has more.
It was the global refugee crisis in 2015 that prompted the Olympic Committee to create a team composed of refugees. It took part in the 2016 Olympics and it will go to the Tokyo Games next week. Among the athletes here, many of them, like Rose Lukonyen, fled the violence in South Sudan.
I'm hoping to improve on my time and also to wish all the best to my colleagues. At least we can do something at Tokyo 2020.
Last year, the restrictions imposed because of the coronavirus hampered their training.
You prepare since 2019, so we are in a good shape. So now 2020, the corona is coming, so the shape is lower down, and so at least this year when we open the camp, so at least a bit so we catch up and our training is going on well.
The team's mentor is former Kenyan marathon world record holder Tigray Lorupe.
For the 29 athletes that I'm going to lead, I think we will not miss a medal. We have also Popole for the judo from Brazil. We have this lady from Iran who's already have a medal in taekwondo. So I think there are possibilities.
The UN's refugee agency said there are currently 80 million people in the world who have fled conflict and persecution. It urged sports fans worldwide to support enthusiastically the refugee Olympic team in Tokyo.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.